Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live session. It's so good to be back on camera. And today I am joined by two pretty awesome experts, Miss Katie Knatzer, who is a senior manager at Avero Advisors, and Mr. Abhijit Varakar, AV for short, but he is the founder and CEO from Avero. Today we're talking about the ERP procurement nightmare, or what could potentially be a nightmare, right? How to avoid that. This is a very, very important topic, sparked by some recent interactions with potential clients and also current clients. So, AV, Katie, I'm going to let you guys dive in. I think we should tell the story, right, of what happened and how to avoid a similar situation.
So let me start. I think it's important to know that we won't name names because some of these things are pretty embarrassing for those in the public sector, especially on the IT and procurement side, because it comes down to what we've been talking about for months now, or maybe it's been years, that you need to know what you're buying. You need to know what the definitions are. You need to know what it means to you and to the vendor. Things like implementation support. What does that mean? Configuration. What does that mean? Go live. What does that mean? And are the two definitions in common? So recently, and this isn't the first time, right? We've been able
Yeah.
to help clients out with badly written contracts, poor RFPs, and just help them from being taken advantage of by the vendors, uh, the unscrupulous ones, not everybody. So this recent one, we've been in touch with them since, I don't know, last year on their ERP upgrade, and they had a leadership change, and the CIO that is leading the charge went ahead and signed, I think, the first proposal and contract that was put in front of them, um, without really taking into account what it means and what the nitty gritty of it is. So now they're in a position where they've signed a multi $100,000 contract with some really bad promises made that we know are not going to be fulfilled. And this client is now in a position of, a bad spot, really, unless they go back and either hire third party implementation experts, project managers, or go back and renegotiate the contract, which is a harder process to do. But either way, they're going to spend resources on this process. Katie, what do you have to
Right.
add?
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is just not taking into account and spelling out what those details actually are in the contract. So when you don't understand what you're actually buying, what does the contract actually say? So how are you supposed to hold vendors accountable if you don't know what they're providing you?
Yeah.
So really just not taking the first proposal, but also understanding what those details imply in that contract, and being able to understand that your organization is going to be taken care of and actually be able to implement the software with the time that's been quoted and the time that's been given. And also that, you can actually handle it internally at your organization, not just what you're paying for from the vendor's contract, but now that there is a gap in the hours for the implementation or having to bring other people in, what does that look like from a workload and an accountability standpoint for your organization? Because that's when upfront, before you even get started, that's going to be a number one risk and red flag for not having a successful implementation.
So let's
So,
let's dig into. Sorry,
I,
Megan, go ahead.
Well, I think we were about to say the same thing. I think what we should do for our viewers is break this story down, right? So it started with an executive getting bombarded by software vendors, who knows for how long, right? And so, how can an executive take a step back when they're being bombarded and think critically about some of these things? And let's just walk through the process of what could have been done to avoid this situation.
Yeah. I think the first thing is defining not just what you need, but also educating yourself and your staff on what things mean, right? Technology has changed so much in the last 20 years, in the last 5 years. So maybe the last time you oversaw an implementation was 20 years ago, and the world is a different place now. It will be a different place in 6 months. So I think the first thing to do is get back to the drawing board and define things. What do they mean to you? Like the first thing I would go and look at is, how do you define enterprise software, right? Because if you've implemented something 15, 20 years ago, it's probably trying to do all of the things for you, all the way from accounting, finance, HR, purchasing, you name it, property management. For in case of housing authorities, it's trying to do your waitlist management, eligibility, intake, operations. All of that was being done in a single platform, or trying to be done. Along the way, you had the systems not doing what they were promising to do, so you had to come up with a lot of workarounds and Excel sheets and sticky notes to get through your workday. So all of that has changed. Now we're talking about best of breed solutions. We're talking about industry specific solutions that do specific things or processes. Not saying that is the best way forward, but we need to really define what boundaries you're going to draw when you start talking about replacing your software. Are you throwing the whole thing out and getting a new thing? How do you know that the thing doesn't work for you? Have you done the homework to identify where the gaps are, where the processes are breaking down, where you have more sticky notes, and really put a box around? And if we were involved, we would help you visualize this through, whiteboarding, like, Katie's whiteboard back there on what client. But we'll help you visualize what this should look like, and then find the gap. So I think that is step one.
And I want to add to that. So I'll take that a step deeper. So not just visualizing, but documenting. Not just doing an overlay of, well, this kind of works here and it goes to this department. Really defining how, from a cross-departmental standpoint, how people function and work together, and utilizing a system in the mix for that. Because most of the time when we go in, we see, cool, they may use the system to do these types of things, but they pass around 30 different forms, paper forms, with handwriting all over them to like actually pass information between departments. It happens all the time. But what does that really look like for you? Because someone over here who's been doing the same job for 25 years and someone over here who's also been there for quite some time, they may be doing the same thing differently and have no idea that each other are doing it. So really assessing and documenting what your processes look like. And then also on top of an operational standpoint, looking from a system standpoint at your data. What does your data look like? Where does it live? How is it maintained? Is it even accessible for you as a client? Because sometimes people don't even know. So really understanding those details, it doesn't necessarily have to be a complete deep dive, but understanding how you can access it, how it's maintained, so that you can actually understand when you go and you talk to your vendor that you know what that workload is going to look like, or you can assess that with a third party prior to even getting into an implementation.
Yeah, I love what I'm hearing is question, right? Question the process, question my day-to-day workload, question where my sticky notes are. Let's talk a little bit about questions to ask my IT department, because I think we're on calls a lot that people say, well, I don't know, IT handles that. Well, this software is being handled by IT. I don't know where my data is. I don't know how that works, and my IT department says this. So how do they hold their IT departments accountable? And more importantly, how do they build them into this process?
Yeah, I would say stop thinking of it as an IT project in the first place. This is a line of business project. If you're being told that IT will handle it, I mean, there's very, in rare cases, it's handled well overall, right? But it is a line of business process and a project, and it should be dictated by the CFO, the housing managers, whatever the subject matter or the main function that this software is supposed to automate and make more transparent for you. that function should be dictating what needs to happen. And then if you want IT to run the project, that's fine. They still don't understand your business as intricately as you do as a CFO, as a public housing agency director, as a city manager or a utilities director. The line of business needs to dictate what happens, and also the definitions of what should happen, right? Again, going back to my first point in defining what this should look like, not just, of course, at a requirements definition level, but at a very high level, especially when you have one system trying to do everything. You need to carve it out and say, here's where finance ends and housing takes over. Here's where public works ends and land management takes over. Those things, if you're defined and put buckets around or boxes around, will help really in digging down into the next level.
Absolutely. And if people, or if our clients don't know where to start, what role does Avero play or a third party consultant play in this questioning strategy? How do we handhold through this particular process?
I mean, first thing is they all have day jobs, right? How do you carve out, this is a once in a lifetime, once in a career project. How do you stop doing your CFO job or your controller job and handle this project? Even in IT, they have day jobs. They have big responsibilities in keeping the agency secured, the data backed up, everyone happy at their computers. So really need to think of this as if you're building a new public safety building, as if you're building a new housing development, as if you're building a new school. This is of the magnitude. You're going to spend $2 or $3 million on, at the end of the day, on a new software. So it's not too far different from building a school building. So we need to, number one, think of these projects as line of business projects with major support from IT. And secondly, that the magnitude of this should not be underestimated. So when it comes to definition, we are also seeing some of our prospects get into the trap of considering this just to be a conversion.
Mm-hmm.
We're just converting from one system to another. We're just bringing data over from this system to that system. It's never that simple. Conversion is one of 100 different things that happen during a software implementation. And to call it a conversion is doing disservice to everybody involved. And if you're starting there, you're going to face many stumbling blocks.
Yep, exactly. And not only that, but you're completely discounting the actual business process that goes into the functions that you're putting data into. The business process and functions within itself, it's the most critical part of what you're putting into the system, how it's designed and how it's configured. The data is just the second piece to feed all of those functions. So really only classifying it as an upgrade or a conversion is not a good mindset to have when going into a system implementation.
Yeah, and sadly, some vendors are changing platforms completely and disguising that as an upgrade, or we're just changing the label on it, right? So that's a fallacy. We've had a client that really, not their fault, they took it to be just this product was bought by another company and they were going to change the labels and make it look like it was a new product, is how the upgrade was sold. But when we got into the implementation, it was a full-blown new system implementation that's now dragged on for 3 or 4 months longer than it should have been.
And not only that, but that creates a ripple effect within the organization because those expectations are set months in advance. This is only going to be an upgrade. It's only going to take this many staff resources or this many hours or months to do it. And if they're telling you that it's going to take you 6 months to implement a software system, laugh because that never ever happens. It never only takes 6 months. And at the very least, you will have a mediocre minimum viable product at that stage. So with minimal testing.
And I think that's a good point, Katie, because that's where the definition of go live comes into the picture, right? What is go live to the vendor? To them, it is that we have installed, your system, that we have created accounts for you, and it's live on their servers. Now, is it useful to the city, county, or housing authority? Are you doing processes in 7 steps where it should have taken you 3, or took you 2 steps in the older system? Is that really go live? Just because you have it doesn't mean you're live on it. Is it giving you advantages that you thought you were going to get when you signed on the dotted line, right? So what does go live mean? That's the second definition that you should all agree on and put in your RFP or procurement docs or even the contract, because then you control the narrative, you control when the date is, you control the timelines. Of course, you have to work around and into the vendor's methodology, but really you should be dictating critical things like what modules go live when and what that means to you.
And not only that, but defining what that success of a go live looks like for your organization. Have they fully trained your employees, not just the train the trainer aspect of they're going to train your supervisors and then your supervisors are going to train and disseminate down from there, but do they train all of your users? Are there resources that they can use outside of the system or a learning portal that they can go to and do self-guided learning? Are they adapting and adopting to the system? Or are they still opening up their spreadsheets and using them? How is that change continually communicated and created in the organization? And being able to fully transition to the new system, making sure that it's working effectively and efficiently and going through appropriate testing. Those are really critical pieces. And I think those are kind of afterthoughts for people because they get focused on conversion and they get focused on doing these very small things, but really the kind of meat of actually having a system is making sure that people can use it and do their jobs to appropriately adopt the system. So making sure that they're trained, making sure that they understand what those processes look like and how they can do those functions in the job is going to really, really change the trajectory of an ERP implementation.
Absolutely. I want to, go ahead, AV. I'm sorry.
We've had a lot of content out there on roles and responsibilities. This is a great point, right? And you want to talk about who does what. We've also seen in this newest contract we reviewed for the client that we haven't done work with yet. The vendor proposed 200 hours on professional services for the whole implementation. What that means is if it's a 1-year implementation, it's less than 20 hours a month on the vendor actually spending time on your configurations and process setups. That means there's a gap there, right? This is a full-time thing. We're not exaggerating about this. So 200 hours is not enough. And you haven't accounted for anything else, like your own time, consultants, project management, and third-party configuration professionals, right? We don't do that, but there are people that are experts in specific systems that are needed to come in and configure for you. If the software vendors, all they're doing is selling you the software, and then it's up to you to make it work.
And that goes back to the beginning, AV, when we're talking about defining what that looks like and really asking the hard questions about what's in the contract. Like those things for those implementation professional services hours, that should be spelled out in the contract, what they're actually providing. It's not just a line item on the cost proposal. That needs to be part of the terms of the contract and really dissecting and understanding how that's going to take place and how and what they are accountable for.
Yeah. And that's yes. Thank you, Eric, for joining our live. Hey.
Lift and shift is it used to be a term. It still is when you're trying to just take something that's crumbling and save the day by just shifting it to a newer, more secure platform that doesn't do anything for your business processes. It's just keeping the system a little more secure. but good point. I'm sorry.
Yes.
You were
Great
saying.
point. No. I think we were going to segue into this anyway, but I do want to talk a little bit about the procurement process, specifically how those business requirements become the contract and things to look for. Katie just spelled out a few of the things that we need to look for in a contract, but if we're taking this same story and we're doing it the correct way, how do those requirements become my contract, and then how do I negotiate a contract moving forward?
So I think it's kind of a culmination of everything that we've touched on at this point. It's laying out what you're defining as an organization, having someone assess what the needs are. So what does that look like from HR, finance, utility billing, property, like your property managers? What does the properties look like? If you have a corporate umbrella for property management, what does that look like on an agency level? So understanding those needs and defining and documenting what those needs are from functional requirements in a requirements traceability matrix, and using that as part of your RFP to have vendors respond to your solicitation and understand if they can or cannot meet your needs. And if they can't, what are the options there? Or do you totally scrap it and go with something else? So looking at your different options. And then when they respond to that and tell you that they can meet your needs, when you get into it, you sign that contract, those requirements are part of your contract, and they are there to hold the vendor accountable because they said that they could do those functions for you, and the system could perform in a way that would meet your needs.
Yeah, and I just dropped some links in the comments below for all of our content related to all of this. So great points, Katie. And it really comes down to defining the outcome first, right? What do you want this to look like? And then you can fill in the stepping stones as you go along.
Absolutely. Okay. Do you guys want to dive into a little bit about how to select the right vendor? I know we've talked about, we've got to have a vision, right? We've got to know what that is, and we've got to define the steps to how we do our day-to-day work, right? How do we go about holding the hand for now the RFP is out and now we're looking to select a vendor, right? What is it that we do as a third-party consultant to manage the selection?
So it differs by industry, right? Of course, if we were the private sector, it would be much easier. You choose a vendor and you go with it. In the I know it's not that simple, but sure, simpler than our clientele. In our case, if it's a city county government, that landscape is competitive right now, right? You've had incumbent software vendors that have been around for a while, and you have new interest from larger corporations like Workday, Oracle, into the mid market of the public sector. And then you have on the housing authority side, it's a very different landscape. There's one company that's been around that has had the lion's share of the market for the last 30 plus years, and then another one that's been in the property management business that is now paying more attention to the public housing sector, and it's wide open. So picking the right vendor is always a moving target, but you have to do your homework to make sure that you're protected, that you're putting out very detailed requirements and specifications for vendors to respond to, because otherwise you can't hold them accountable. It's like going to a contractor and saying, how much for a house? They'll tell you based on what car you drove, how you're dressed, what watch you're wearing. You'll get a price from them. But is it the house? They haven't asked you where it's located, what kind of square footage do you want, what kind of doors, how many windows. All of that needs to be documented. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a bill and no house. And we've seen that happen to many agencies.
And not only that, but making sure you're using data-driven decisions when you're selecting a system. So taking all of these pieces that you built early on in the procurement process, whether it's your RFP responses, your RTM responses, and other items that you do throughout the selection process. Maybe it is reference calls or demo scripts, things of that nature, scoring those and actually looking from a data standpoint, what system actually meets our needs based on all of these things culminated together to come up with data, and not just, oh, this one's the cheapest one, let's run with it, they gave us the best deal.
Yeah, I think that that's a symptom of not thinking of this as a major undertaking for the organization,
Yeah.
or thinking of it as just a conversion. Just we're going to move from this vendor to that vendor. And it's just fraught with risk.
Yeah.
Right. So with the story that we told in the beginning of this live, what is our first step in helping this client work through this nightmare of they've selected an ERP system and they don't know what role anybody is going to play in this conversion?
Yeah, I think, and we've been here before, right? What probably will happen is on the kickoff call, they'll find out that the vendor says, "Well, that's not what we meant," or they'll ask, "Who's your configuration consultant?" or who's leading the data conversion?" And at that point, the client's CIO will say, "Well, what do you mean? Aren't you doing the implementation?" And that's when the whole thing grinds to a halt until we figure out who's doing what. So I hope it doesn't go there. I hope we can, um, save them from that embarrassment, and that we get in there and help them figure out the organization, the PMO, the who's doing what piece, and come up with a RACI matrix, and really communicate with the client and educate them on how this should go. Work with the vendor; they know how this should go, right? The unscrupulous ones are taking advantage of the fact that the last time the CIO did a large implementation was 15 years ago. They don't know. They're getting signed off, and they're off to the next one. So our job is to get in there before kickoff and help them figure this out. Go ahead, Katie.
And sometimes we get in there after kickoff.
Yeah.
That's not ideal, but it's not too late. When they do get in there and they tell you, hey, who's taking care of your data, or who's actually managing the implementation to the client, it's not too late to bring a third party in. The word of advice would be to never kick off if you don't understand what you've purchased, or what the plan is for your organization, if you don't understand what that looks like from an implementation standpoint. But that we have been there, and we have done that multiple times. So
Yeah, I'll tell a story of the last time that happened. Right, it was a public housing authority client signed the deal and kick off because there was no one party responsible. There was no PMO. 45 people showed up to this kickoff call. And on this call with 45 people that are executives, management of the client, the vendor asked those questions. Who's doing your implementation? Who's doing configuration? All we are doing is selling you the software. And if you have questions, by the way, we'll use one of those 200 hours to answer those questions. So immediately, the project was in turmoil. And when we got involved, we were able to set up the PMO. Not only that, we were able to find and select a third-party configuration team for the client on that specific software. Now think of the time that's been spent, and now the client, when they've budgeted for, gone to their boards and said, "We have the best software out there. It's going to cost $1 million." On day two, you're finding out that it's going to cost you $2 million because you didn't think this through, or you didn't ask the right questions, or you weren't open to listening to someone who's done this before, and you only relied on a vendor's word on how this should go and what it's going to take. And to their detriment, right? The vendors need to ask those, how can you do that? You need to tell them what they're getting into upfront.
Yeah. Maybe we should come up with, one pager on questions to ask vendors that are soliciting me every day and showing up in my inbox, right? Things to think about, maybe some
Yeah.
bullet points to tag to this conversation that we're having. I think that would be helpful for some of our viewers.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
What other questions do you have, Megan?
I think we covered everything that was on my list. I think this has been a great conversation. You guys have provided some great points for our viewers to think about. If there are any other questions that you guys have or want to know, please follow these links. We're very easily accessible. Please reach out to us. We're happy to help in any way we can. I'm good unless you guys have other points you would like to make.
No, all of this has been said before, and all of the content and knowledge exists to help you if you are in this process of thinking about replacing and not knowing where to start. Please reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important what Katie said. It is never too late to call on us or to call on anyone to help you through some of these things that we've discussed today. So thank you guys for joining us, and we will catch you
Thank
next
you.
week. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.